Good day, my fellow Americans and good people of the world. Today I'd like to address you in brief in regards to the present situation and what's going on with this second execution of a U.S. citizen in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the second time that the POTUS 47 regime, the MAGA government, has decided to jump to conclusions and to frame the situation in such a way where it is their intention and what they believe is right in terms of the approach to all this to take away the rights of U.S. citizens in order for the administration and those under the under the direct orders of the administration to avoid accountability when they do something wrong. So their logic is that what's right for them is to remove your rights in order for them to face accountabilities when they do the wrong thing. And the oath to the Constitution is, preserve, protect, defend the Constitution, and to recognize the Constitution as an insular protection from the government imposing its will upon the people, infringing on the lives of the individual, interceding on behalf of the individual in such a way that's not conducive to their life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And, good government is to, provision, accommodate, steward, support the American people in such a way where we're achieving collectively the preamble promise. It's not the government's job to go around and to, kick up sand and stir up trouble and cause people to live in a state of fear, and that there are only two options that they're left with is to submit to this violent force of the government coming in and stripping away people's rights, stripping away, people and disappearing them away, or taking the lives of people, like killing people. And you either stand down so that they can do those things unimpeded and without dissent, or you could be their next target, and that there is no path of recourse, that if that happens to you, that justice will ever be served. And there is no assurances that you could just be a person walking down the street or driving down the road and just be at the wrong place at the wrong time, and you get caught up in the middle of this, and suddenly your children are in harm's way. The incident of the young family that was leaving a basketball game in their car and got caught up in this, crazy clash on the streets between protesters and ICE agents, and, this family was turned into, just, victims of circumstance, but to the point where, their youngest child, the 6-month-old baby, lost consciousness and could have died had the mother not jumped in, instinctual response to do everything she could to preserve her child's life and bring her child back into animated life. And in that regard, and in the regard of the execution of two of our fellow Americans, in the regard to all of these, abuses and physical violence and, pepper spraying and chemical agents against our fellow Americans, and, the rhetoric and the mayhem and the chaos and all of these things, the children that are getting exploited and abused and abducted, and, the ICE agents that are, beating up and robbing, teenage boys that are American citizens, and, families being separated to the point where people are like living in fear and hiding in their homes and desperation, and the whole entire city has been brought to a halt. The motor of the city has stopped because people can't go to work, and businesses are closing, and like all of these things. And what does the government say about all of these things? That they're there to do a job, and it doesn't matter how they do that job. What is all that matters to them and all that's important to them is the ends, and any means that they use is justified. And see, I'm not okay with that outcome. I'm not okay with that sense that they are allowed to do whatever the hell they want, and that we just have to face it. And if we don't want to get caught up in it and become collateral damage to their, violent approach to immigration that lacks poise, tact, reasonableness, lawfulness, regulations, rules, orderliness, peaceableness, none of those things. There's no respects or dignities to it at all. It does not, it flies in the face of all reason, and it wholly subverts everything that we stand for here in America. And their response to it is just like, if you don't like it, tough, boo-hoo, is their response. And then you get the administration telling people, XYZ excuse, and they don't really care. They'll go up there and act exactly like Trump said when, he was a candidate, Trump, saying that I could go out and stand in the middle of the street and shoot somebody in the middle of the street and I wouldn't lose any votes for it. And he's operating off of that assumption that he can do whatever he wants, with impunity, and that by extension anybody else that's doing his bidding has the same, capacity to do whatever, and that there's no accountability, no responsibility. There's nowhere to turn in this United States of America where we can find the helpers who can correct for this dire circumstance and situation that has been created by the federal government. Because the federal government has spent the first, few months of the first year of the administration eroding all of the checks and balances, fear-mongering, members in Congress and courts to do the bidding and the will, corporations and individuals and law firms and schools and everybody else has been fear-mongered into a submissive suppression under the threat of Trump's retaliation of using the full force of the American government against people who don't align with his worldview and his plan that he has figured out, that he's making America great. That when you look at what he ran on in the campaign, like nothing of what he's doing now is comparative to what he said he was going to do to make America great. And so all of these people who were misled by Trump's deception to think that America great meant that first we're going to make sure that America is taken care of before we focus our attention on other nations. And we're going to make sure that America works for everybody. Cost of living is improved, quality of life is improved, our streets are safer. We don't have to worry about the, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and the potential risks and harms that are a viable variable when we have an immigration system that doesn't have the appropriate, systems to function in such a way where it's legitimate and it's preventing us from assuming unnecessary risks, or to allowing people to come in here en masse to the point where it overburdens our systems. But instead of creating a system in which, you know, uh, we can create efficiencies and innovate out those problems and solve for them in a peaceable, humane way. Instead, it's taking all of the money that could be going and should be going to the improvement of the quality of lives of Americans is now going to ICE agents to pay them $50,000 sign-on bonus in order for them to get out of jail free card to go and shoot people on will and whim on the American streets, knowing that there's going to be no accountability for it. And these people are laughing about it and joking about it, and doing competitions to see who can put the most bullets in a person and get away with it in the end. And these sorts of situations that we're creating are not conducive to a peaceable situation. It doesn't unite the nation. It does not keep us in a state of domestic order or domestic stability. It doesn't reinforce us in such a way where we're consciously, collectively considering we should be law-abiding citizens because America's worth defending. Like, all of those things are being eroded when you're seeing a small portion of the population empowered by the president to do whatever they want on the streets. It's creating a very unfair situation. And then you see what the American president is doing in terms of the economy, to rigging it to favor only a few, upper echelon elites that he's a part of. Meanwhile, suing the American people in order to give Trump more money, and then, creating economic viabilities and opportunities that are not about improving the quality of life for people, to raise the standard of living, make sure people get good pay, make sure people have, health and medical benefits so they don't go bankrupt and destitute, like trying to strip people of their money because they're not paying their student loans on time, and making the price of groceries going up and doing nothing about fixing for that problem, and claiming to be dropping the price of prescription drugs when that really hasn't panned out in any capacity. Nothing that's happening is actually improving the quality of people's lives. And so in Trump's America First, it's like, America must first yield to the whims, the wills, the wants, and the needs of Trump, and then from that place of total concentrated power, as that power continues to be concentrated into Trump and his very small cabinet, that power is starting to get more and more corrupt, and more bad things are starting to happen to good people, to the point where now the Trump administration is justifying executing Americans on the streets because they were asserting their amendment rights, their First and Second Amendment rights, to free speech, and then possession of a firearm. But those rights for those individuals were exactly what the government used as a justification by which they were executed. Because they were exercising their rights, the government executed them. And the government then framed those innocent people who were expressing their amendment rights as being getting their just desert in that regard. And that the entire shift of the narrative in the administration is now speaking as though you better watch yourself, Americans, because your First and Second Amendment rights are actually not rights that you have anymore. They're privileges that you only get if we deem you as, being deserving of them. And mind you, the people who they think are deserving it are pardoned January 6ers, masked up and geared up like a military force deployed to the streets, and with impunity can go and pop a cap in your ass like it's nothing, and it's fine if they do that. But if you are just, being a, gun carrier legally with a permit, but you happen to, use your First Amendment rights to stand up and voice your dissent against this violent force on the streets, you have now made yourself a target, and your rights will be denied to you and your life will be taken from you, so you better watch out. This is the narrative that they're creating at the federal level, and I'm not okay with these outcomes. I believe that the 2A rights represents the provide for the common defense aspects of the preamble promise, and that it's extremely important that we protect this right, but we also need to respect and appreciate that there needs to be responsibilities that come with rights. For in case there are people that would use that right to in a way that where they cannot self-control in a moment, of a heated moment, and instead of leading to de-escalate a situation and to care about preserving life and respecting the life, liberty, and happiness of other people, to instead in a heated moment use your weapon in such a way that is a force beyond what would be reasonable, in exceeding what is reasonable to the point where it would take another person's life. People who can't have that form of self-control to refrain from using a gun in retaliation or use a gun in a heated moment without first measure being to just de-escalate the situation, but the immediate response to go to escalate it to the highest form of response in using a gun to shoot somebody, which is what happened in these cases with these ICE agents executing American citizens. There was no reasonable self-control or any sense that there was some sort of training that kicked in that says what they need to do in that situation is to keep all parties safe, because they're enforcing the law, which also means that they themselves have to abide by the law, that we don't just go around shooting people in America, and the idea that if you own a gun or you use a gun, you have to know the responsibilities that come with that, which includes safe operation, as well as knowing how to have self-control. And that's why we have gun regulations are important, because then we can control the person before they use that gun in an out of control way. Then things get out of hand, and the first response that somebody who does not have self-control, in order to gain control of an out of control situation, is going to use the force that they have in their hands, which doesn't work in the interest of all parties involved. And so the unreasonableness that's already inside that person who's not trained on, how to defuse a situation is of course going to escalate. And the federal government is empowering, enabling, ennobling, encouraging, supporting, and offering immunity and backing up with false narratives and jumping to conclusions and assumptions and refusing to do actual investigative, approach to figuring out what happened, and not giving a reasonable response to the American people to say, we're sorry and we're going to do our best to make sure this does not happen again. Instead, they're like, this is the new norm. Adjust, adapt and overcome, right? And I'm not okay with the outcomes that they're forcing us into, and I hope that my fellow Americans can agree that this is not the America that we want to stand for. And with that, I'm grateful for your valuable time, attention, and consideration in regards to this matter. Peace be with us all. I appreciate you. Be well.